More perspective on all of the developments in Washington at the Trump White House and in Congress. We are joined by talk show host Chip Franklin. Chip, one of the other issues that the White House has been dealing with the last 24 hours are a series of reports that President Trump is looking, his staff is looking at ways to undermine the special counsel Robert Mueller, and that maybe even President Trump wants to pardon people who might be the target of a Mueller investigation. What's going on there?
Well, you know, constitutionally, he can do it. He can pardon everybody involved, and he can even pardon himself, which, of course, would create a quasi-constitutional crisis, to say the least. You know, the real question here is, you know, how does a president put himself in a position like this 6 months into it, where he's even investigating? The Post reports, and now CNN, and pretty much everybody else, that he's looking into this. He's actually asked counsel what he can do. A caveat, though, is, and this would be even stranger, should he do that? Should he pardon everybody? He can't stop the impeachment proceedings. You can't pardon yourself for impeachment. The Constitution specifically says that. And also a state could file charges. And you can't pardon somebody for state crimes, just federal crimes. So who knows?
Well, Chip, President Trump said that Mueller is, quote, crossing the line when he starts to look at his business dealings as part of the Russia investigation. What do you make of that?
Well, Trump's business dealings go back to the 80s. There were oligarchs and kleptocrats in the Trump Tower in the 80s, funneling and laundering money. Now, I'm not saying he knew about it, but you can go back and see it. Just Google it and find out Trump's been involved with the Russians for a long, long time. And when you say Trump, you say money. So the idea that Mueller can't go looking into connections between the president, the financial tentacles here, the octopus arms that go everywhere, you know, whether it's the kleptocrat that gave him $100 million for a $40 million home, and you know, or Manafort. Manafort, this is the best story I love. Manafort claimed income from a Ukrainian company that was working with Russia to help Russia's image in the United States. You're familiar with that, right? He claimed $17 million he was paid. That same company just said this week, we only made $16 million in that period. So, yeah, I would want to ask questions as to where Manafort, who ran the campaign, got this money if he didn't get it from this company. So, yeah, there's a lot of financial questions that got to be answered.
Let's bring in Wendy Patrick. She's also a prosecutor. And Wendy, on the question of Donald Trump considering perhaps pardons for himself, my understanding is that the pardon process is the Justice Department usually would make recommendations about people who should be pardoned, and then there's an application process, and then the White House decides based on that. Have you ever heard of a president offering a pardon and circumventing the Justice Department?
No, and I gotta wonder whether or not President Trump was actually asking that question seriously, or whether it was just another diversion. I mean, this has been a week of diversions, and that was one of the ones we heard at the beginning of the week. You know, this is Made in America week. I can't even think of any footage that we've seen over the last couple of days that have even touched that, much less gone into it in any detail. Instead, we've been talking today about, of course, the White House shakeup, new press people, and then this whole pardoning. You know, I would be, one of the other things I would be very surprised about is if, in fact, Donald Trump really was considering this, whether he would have said it as publicly as he did. Because you're right, to ask the question makes him look guilty, but I don't think this is something where necessarily, just because there's smoke, there's fire.
Well, Wendy, the president has not only had a big shakeup with his communications office, but he also has a shakeup with his personal legal team. What can you infer from that?
What I can infer from that is that maybe originally he may have selected or kept on some figures that didn't pan out to be able to take the heat in the current administration. Now, everybody's very good. That's all true. Everybody's very good and very qualified. But one of the things you saw in the press conference today is somebody like Scaramucci is probably in a better position of delivering the kind of public presence that Donald Trump wants. Not to say Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Sean Spicer aren't excellent. They both are. But you got to wonder whether or not Donald Trump wants to populate his cabinet and his team with people more like him, because you know he micromanages and watches all the press briefings. And perhaps by bringing in people that are more heavy hitters, that are not afraid to punch back, he might get some of the results that he's seeking. And that may be behind some of the current shakeup that we're hearing about this week.
Well, Chip, do you think that if Donald Trump has a heavier hitter in terms of better communication abilities at the White House podium, that that's going to make a difference on health care or infrastructure or tax reform or the budget or all the other legislative issues where he's struggling?
Well, there's an old saying in show business that says if it's not on the page, it's not on the stage. I don't know how. It's just spin. If there's no substance, if there's no real policies here, what's his health care policy? Do we know? What's his policy toward China? We know what his policy is towards Russia. All these things. By the way, the Made in America Week, I love that. Did you know that Mar-a-Lago actually asked permission to hire more foreign workers during Made in America Week? That's true. Look it up. There's so many things here that Spicer, the reason Spicer left is, you know, would you want that gig? Seriously?
No. The answer is no. Nobody wants the gig, but somebody's got to take it.
No.
Wendy, you get the last word.
Yeah, one of the things that Sarah Huckabee Sanders said once at the beginning of her tenure when somebody was giving her a hard time from the press is she said, do you want to trade places? And I thought that was one of the things that really, you know, you got to think about the tough job that, first of all, working for Donald Trump to begin with, given his standards, and secondly, being thrown to the wolves every day from the media. A house divided cannot stand. We're going to have to see whether or not there's more of a concise ecosystem with these changes that were just made this week.
Yeah, we'll also have to see if the White House spokesperson, Sarah Huckabee Sanders or Scaramucci, can actually say things that President Trump agrees with or will agree with the next day. But in any case,
and
Wendy
doesn't contradict.
And doesn't contradict. And that's
right.
another problem that Sean Spicer had. Wendy Patrick and Chip Franklin, thank you both for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well,